All right. So there are children who, once they grow up, they kind of do their own thing and leave their parents alone for the most part, right? I was not that kid, right? I was an only child. I had no brothers or sisters to play with, and I was a bit of a nerd, frankly, right? You know what a nerd is, right? And I like to think about things and study things and, figure things out. Looking back, I must have been super annoying to be around, I was constantly looking for projects to work on, right? I was like, this could be a project, this could be. So one day my dad brought in this old Victorian bathtub and he put it in the backyard. You know what a bathtub is? You take baths in a bathtub, right? There's water. That's a bathtub, right? So in the old Victorian days, they had these huge, ugly, maybe beautiful, I don't know, bathtubs. And my dad brought one of those home and he put it in the backyard. And when I saw it there, I was thrilled. I was like, oh my God, it's a project. I'm going to turn this thing into my watery kingdom, right? So there was a marsh near where we lived, and a marsh is like a wetland, right? It's like an area next to the river where there's water, but not a lot of it. When you put on rubber boots, you can walk around, right? So my dad would take me there, every now and then, and we would walk around and we would watch these fascinating creatures, right? All these salamanders and frogs and fish and eels. An eel is a fish that looks like a snake, basically, right? Like there are electric eels, but not in our area, fortunately. So anyway, I became obsessed, totally obsessed with the idea of having all these creatures in my backyard and being able to feed them and watch them, right? So when my dad brought in this old bathtub, I was like, it's a dream come true. So every Sunday, first thing in the morning, I would wake my dad up and I'd be like, Dad, let's go to the marsh. And my dad would be like, what time is it? 5? Oh, for fuck's sake. And then he would go because, there's only so much whining that a grown man can take, right? So we would head out and we would do our thing. At first, my dad was a little bit skeptical about my enthusiasm for the project. He was like, you're going to drop it anyway. But once he realized that I was serious about making it work, he made me a net to catch things with, right? He made it out of a pair of old curtains, and it allowed me to catch all these wonderful creatures. And I would catch them, I would bring them home, I would put them in the bathtub, and I'd watch them just mess around, hang out, whatever. And I loved them. I loved all of them. But eels became kind of like my holy grail. Right? I really wanted to catch an eel and I couldn't. And I was probably lucky because if I had been able to catch an eel and had it join my pond party, I would have been horrified. Because it turns out that eels are actually vicious predators. They eat everything they can get their mouths around, including each other. Like they're killers. They're like cold-blooded killers. There was actually this experiment that took place in the 1930s in Paris, France, where a bunch of researchers put 1,000 eels, a lot of them, right? 1,000 eels in this big tank of water, and they were tiny little things. They were barely an inch long, right? And they put them in, and they fed them for like a year. But other than that, they did not keep track of what was going on in the tank. They just didn't care, right? They would just put food in and they would keep the lid closed. So a year later, they open the tank and they look in and there's 71 left. And it wasn't because the rest got sick and died, it was because they fucking ate each other, right? And so by this point, the 71 eels are a lot longer than they were, which no surprise there, right? So the scientists are intrigued. They're like, ooh, très intéressant. We should watch these animals. So they spend the next 3 months